Okay, we made it to Fort Snelling. And you can see like this building right here behind me. That was, and I'll include the picture of the sign for you, that was built as a barracks in about 1904, 1905 for cavalry soldiers. And it actually, it stopped being for cavalry soldiers in 1911, but it was in use until the 1940s and 1950s, and it became a Japanese language school for people who needed to use the language within their military experience. If I go back around this way, you can see behind me the round tower, which is an original structure for the fort. And as well, just remember a little bit of history about the fort. The fort was built started construction in 1820. Zebulon Pike secured the land from the Dakota in 1805. It was the first land purchase in Minnesota for land from the Dakota people. And then, only 2 of the 7 leaders of that area actually agreed to sell the land, and they got about $200 in cash and goods for those 2 pieces of land for the future fort. It's now called Fort Snelling at Bdote, and Bdote is a Dakota word that symbolizes sacred place or sacred meeting. And so the fort actually started, remember they sent Colonel Henry Leavenworth to build a fort in 1819, and he built a place called Camp New Hope, and if you remember, I called it Camp No Hope. He was replaced in 1820 by Josiah Snelling, and at that point it was called Fort St. Anthony. It took from 1820 to 1823 to build the fort, and then in 1825 it was renamed after Snelling, after Josiah Snelling, because an inspector came and saw that he had done such a good job with the fort that they wanted it renamed in his honor. So we're going to go see what we can see outside of the fort. We can't go in it, it's closed right now, but I'll show you a couple of other areas around here too. So this is the round tower from the other side. There are 2 levels in it, and you can go in. Just beyond the wall that you see there is the entrance for the round tower, and you can go inside of it, and it kind of winds around so that you can actually stand up on that very top part. So this is the outside of the fort. Much of it is original. There's the gate of the fort. That's where you enter for your tours. Okay, and there's another corner house over there. So this area demonstrates the Three Sisters Garden. There's a sign right there. If you remember the Three Sisters, okay, what they would do is the crops would help each other. So they would dig a hole, put a dead fish in the hole to be used as fertilizer, and they would plant the corn, squash, and beans all together so that the squash was the ground cover, the beans were that middle level, and then the corn was the higher level so they could shelter each other. So that's some of the crops that the Dakota would use, called the Three Sisters. One of the questions you might have is, what happened at Fort Snelling? What was it used for? Were any battles ever fought here? And no battles were ever fought here. Fort Snelling was used as a training area for those Minnesota soldiers that Alexander Ramsey committed for the Civil War. They came here to train. You might also ask, what's original and what isn't? Well, you can see much of it has been rebuilt. And if you look closely, you can see differences in stone color. So it should be pretty easy to tell what's original and what was rebuilt. You can look especially to that far side, like right, oh, whoops, my finger is not focusing well. Right over there, you can see the difference between the original stone and the new stone. We're gonna walk around the other side and see what we can see of the fort from the other side. Here's a round tower up close. And I wanna see if I can take you inside, sort of, to see through these openings. Can you see that? I'm gonna reach my arm through here. So you can see the stairs where you can go up to the top of the round tower. That's really cool. Super cool. Remember, the round tower is one of the original pieces of the fort. Okay, obviously everything is locked up. And I'm not, as much as I want to climb the wall, I'm not going to climb the wall for you guys. But yay, that building that you see right there inside the walls of the fort, that is the schoolhouse. So if soldiers were here and they had families, their children would be educated in the schoolhouse. Over there, that building in there, okay, and the buildings on the other side would be the hospital, the barracks. On the far side, if you kept walking straight, you can't see it from here, but that would be where whoops, I'm sorry, can't really see it very well, where Dred and Harriet Scott lived. And then all the buildings that you can see, I'm gonna back up here, you can see the roof or the chimneys of all of these. Those house soldiers. The workers would do laundry down at the river, which is just beyond over that stone wall or that fence right there. The river is just down below there, and they would take their clothes and wash them in the river down below. We're gonna see if we can get maybe one more angle there so that we can look inside and see a couple of other things. One of the other things that took place, two other things that took place here at the fort happened after the US-Dakota War. Once the Dakota surrendered, essentially all of the Dakota were exiled from Minnesota. That means they were kicked out of Minnesota, except for about 150 who were used as guides and interpreters. Now, just on the other side of this round tower, there was an execution that took place of two Dakota leaders, Shakopee and Medicine Bottle. They had escaped to Canada after the US-Dakota War, which at that time was called the Sioux Uprising. And they were brought back from Canada and they were hanged here at the fort. Now that took place after the mass execution, which you'll learn about in chapter 9, where 38 Dakota were sentenced to death. And they were all hanged at the same time in Mankato. That's another field trip to show you that monument and that memorial. In the last segment, I talked about two things that happened at Fort Snelling after the US-Dakota War. There were many Dakota then who were removed from their reservations. They were taken here to Fort Snelling, where they were kept through the winter of 1863 in what's called an internment camp, or you might know it as a prisoner of war camp. During that winter, many Dakota died of hunger and disease and other illnesses and sicknesses like that. Following that winter, the remaining Dakota were loaded onto steamboats, brought down the Mississippi River, across the Missouri River into South Dakota, and via some trains as well. And they were taken to the Reservation, or reservations in South Dakota and Nebraska, the Santee Reservation, where they were relocated to. Now, many Dakota have come back to their homeland, bought up pieces of land that originally belonged to them. So Fort Snelling to the Dakota does not represent a wonderful piece in our history. It represents something that causes them grief and sadness. So there are always two sides to every piece of history. And we need to remember that in Minnesota with the Dakota, the Ojibwe, and the European Americans who later came to settle Minnesota. Well, that wraps it up for Fort Snelling. I really can't wait until you can go actually inside the walls of the fort and see the amazing things that are in there, especially the place where Dred and Harriet Scott once lived and worked. There's a lot of construction that's going on right now at Fort Snelling, and it actually says it's closed. Well, I know it's closed, but it says it's also closed through the fall and is only open on Saturdays. I'm hopeful that they'll extend your Minnesota History Pass so that you'll be able to come to see some of these places that you haven't been to before that are really important within our Minnesota history. I hope you've enjoyed coming on this journey with me, and I look forward to the next time.